Community Development Committee of the Metropolitan Council. We have a quorum of the committee. Committee members, we have an agenda before us. I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Council members, next on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the January 1st, 2020 regular meeting of the Community Development Committee. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Any discussion, additions, corrections? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Moving on to our business items. The first is 2020-18. It's a joint committees item, the City of Egan 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. And Rhea Smiley will present. Mrs. Smiley, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon.
Chair, council members. I'm here to present the, there it is. The City of Egan's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. I'm Rhea Smiley. I'm the Sector Rep for District 4 in Local Planning Assistance in Community Development Division. I would like to let the committee know that Jill Hoodhunter from the City of Egan, the Community Development Director, and also Eric Slitedal, I'm not saying it. Oh, thank you. The City of Egan's planner, GIS specialist, are both in the audience. I do want to say that working with them was actually very enjoyable because it took quite some time for us to get here, but the working relationship was actually very positive, and I thank you for all the work that you put into this.
Yes, thanks for being here and thanks for your partnership.
Okay, so back to the presentation. Before you is the City of Egan's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. This map that's also in your staff report shows the regional system components within the City of Egan. The components in the City of Egan for the transportation system are highways I-35E, I-494, Trunk Highway 55, and Trunk Highway 77. There are 3 wastewater interceptors in the City of Egan and several regional parks policy plan system components. So I'll just read through those. The Lebanon Hills Regional Park, Mendota Lebanon Hills Greenway Regional Trail, Minnesota River Greenway Regional Trail, Lebanon Hills Big Rivers Regional Trail Search Corridor, Lebanon Hills Mississippi Regional Trail Search Corridor, and there are the Fort Snelling State Park, which is managed by the DNR, and also Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge that's under the jurisdiction of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. These are all located within the City of Egan. Thrive MSP 2040 has designated the city as suburban. The city is located in northern Dakota County and is surrounded by the communities of Mendota Heights, Sunfish Lake, Inver Grove Heights, Rosemont, Apple Valley, Burnsville, Bloomington, and Fort Snelling. Table 1, which is also in your staff report, shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts that the city will grow by 3,700 people, representing 2,600 households, and there will be an increase of 8,600 jobs in the city in the same time frame. So these numbers are based on calculations that are we're using for as a proposed forecast by the city. So you'll be taking an action on this as well. The revision of the sewer service forecast for households results in the same increment of growth from 2021 to 2030. Therefore, the 2021 to 2030 affordable housing need remains the same as 472 units total. Table 3 from the staff report shows the planned residential density in the city. Thrive guides suburban communities to plan for forecasted populations and households at average densities of at least 5 units per acre through development and redevelopment. And the overall density for guided residential land in the city of Egan, as shown in this table, is between 5.13 and 34 units an acre. The city designated 5 areas as special areas: the Central Area Commons, Cedar Grove Commons, Cliff Road Commons, Northeast, and Lebanon Hills, which you can kind of see most of them in the table separately called out. Over 60% of all of the new housing growth will come through redevelopment in these areas. Um, these areas represent most of the future growth, and there are specific plans and documentations associated with each of these areas. The plan also recognizes 2 Metro Red Line BRT station areas within the city of Egan. One of them currently exists, and the other one is a planned station. So for suburban communities, the transportation policy plan guides suburban communities to plan for residential density around a station area for a highway BRT at a minimum density of 10 units an acre. And the 2 stations that are Cedar Grove Station and the Cliff Road Station are at densities of 31.6 and 12.8 units an acre, which are both consistent with our policies. The city's existing land use map is the figure 3 of your staff report. The existing land uses are predominantly residential, that's about 35%. And most of the commercial, industrial, business park, and office are along major transportation corridor like I-35E and I-494, as well as Trunk Highway 77. And about 19% of the city is actually park and open space. The future land use map refers to figure 4 of your staff report. The plan identifies several land use categories to accommodate future residential growth, including about 180 acres of low density and about 10 acres of high density. The plan does acknowledge that some underutilized land may remain within the city and will not be developed. So therefore, the growth will occur through a combination of new development and infill development, as well as redevelopment. The 5 special areas that I mentioned earlier in the presentation are also shown on this map with that blue outline. So you can see the general vicinity of these areas. So the proposed findings today are that the plan conforms to the Metropolitan System plans, is consistent with council policies with the proposed forecast changes, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. On Tuesday, February 11th, Environmental Services staff will present this plan to the Environment Committee, and then the plan is scheduled to be on the Metropolitan Council's agenda on the meeting on February 26th. And I just want to again remind the committee members that the 2 staff members from the City of Egan are in the audience if you have any questions. Okay, with that, the proposed action before you are that to authorize the City of Egan to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, revise the city's forecast upward as shown in Table 1 of the attached review record, revise the city's sewer service forecast upward as shown in Table 2 of the review record, and advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for forecast, land use, and housing. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mrs. Smiley. Questions on that report? Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a special area boundary in Lebanon Hills Regional Park, and I was wondering what that's about.
That was my question too. Thanks for asking it, Councilmember.
This one should know about that. Let me just ask the staff, can you by any chance expand on that? Yeah. I can tell you that that's one of the special areas that has no growth scheduled, planned for it. Therefore, it was not included in any of the our calculation. Those are areas that are not going to be sewer serviced. That's why that's part of the area that is. That's why there is a difference between the sewer service forecast and the overall forecast of the city, because some of the areas on the southern part of the city of Egan, including that area, are not going to be served. But please go ahead.
Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Chair and committee. Uh, this area, there are a few single-family homes. The long-term plans for this area, so those actually, at some point, to be converted to park use, and so that is what the special area is. It's rather different than any of the other special areas, which are intending land use changes for more density, more housing. This one is actually the long-term land use plan is for it to be fully a park use.
Great, thanks. And would you state your name for the record?
Sorry. My name is Jill Hootmacher. I'm the Director of Community Development for the City of Egan.
All right, thanks for being here. Thanks. Yeah, when Ms. Smiley said that, I think it was at 60% of the growth, the housing growth was going to happen in these special areas, and then seeing such a big chunk of a public park carved out, yeah.
That's correct. I apologize. It's
Yeah.
all the other four
Sure,
areas and
sure.
not that one. But most of those, like all of those areas are, as you can see, have very compact developments planned. Most of the mixed uses and high density residential are all in the special areas.
Well, thank you. Further questions on the report, Councilmember Chambliss?
Oh, thank you. No question, just comment. I've seen how Egan has developed and grown over the years, and it's so nice to see how they've put the mixed-use development together and use the TIF funding for, affordable housing. That's great with the community development grants, and I'm sure you're very proud of that. It's well done.
Yeah, good work. Thank you. Any further questions on the report? Seeing none, Mrs. Smiley proposes a series of actions relative to the City of Egan's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Is there a motion to approve?
I would move approval of the proposed action, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you. Second, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thanks again for coming and for your excellent work on this. Next, we'll move on to business item 2, which is 2020-19. It's another joint committee item for the City of Mayor, the 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. And Ms. Torres, Angela Torres, will present. Ms. Torres, welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. If you'll excuse me, I have my cold under control, so I'm not contagious, but you might hear a little bit of fluctuation in my voice. I'm Angela Torres, the manager of local planning assistance in Community Development Division. I'd like to, even though the city and their consultants are not in the audience today, I would like to say that I worked with them for several years throughout questions and to get them to this point today, and they've been excellent partners, and would just like to extend a thank you to the city.
Thank you.
Before you today is the review of the City of Mayor's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. This map shows the location of regional system components within the City of Mayor, including the Dakota Rail Regional Trail and the Western Carver County Regional Trail Search Corridor. Thrive MSP 2040 has designated the city as a rural center. Mayor is located in northwestern Carver County, surrounded by the communities of Watertown Township, Laconia Township, Camden Township, and Hollywood Township. Table 1, also in your staff report, shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts that the city will grow by 880 people, representing 450 households, and projecting an increase of 20 jobs in the city within that same time frame. Table 2 from the staff report shown here illustrates the planned residential density for the city. The overall density for guided residential land is expected to be between 3.01 and 7.93 units per acre. Communities with a rural center designation under Thrive are expected to experience a forecasted population and household growth at an overall average minimum density of 3 to 5 units per acre for new development and redevelopment, and the city's plan is consistent with those council policies. The city's existing land use map, referred to in figure 3 of the staff report, shows that the existing land uses are predominantly agricultural and residential. The city's future land use map, referred to figure 4 in the staff report, and to accommodate future residential growth, the city guides just over 180 acres to 3 different residential land use categories: low, medium, and high density residential, with densities ranging from a minimum of council to a maximum of 22 in hybrid. The city has an existing orderly annexation agreement with neighboring townships of Camden, Laconia, and Watertown. The plan acknowledges the OAAs and identifies that the land will be annexed from the townships into the city based on the staging plan, also shown in figure 5 of this report. The city is proposing to amend the OAA with Watertown Township to the, you see outlined right there, in the white, which is kind of for agricultural use right now. The desire by the city is to develop a more continuous city boundary and focus on connecting existing and future neighborhoods, so they're actually looking at a reduction in their OAA area, and that land land use authority will likely revert to the county, similar to how other townships in the county defer their land use authority to planning. The plan also identifies areas that are beyond 2040, which are outside the 2040 growth area and outside the current OAA. This is worth mentioning because you'll see some comments in the proposed action related to this. The plan does acknowledge that these areas are meant to initiate negotiations with their neighboring townships on the development of future OAAs. Those areas are identified here. You can start seeing the outline of those 5 areas in red ink. They're also identified in figure 6 of the staff report as tentative stage 1. The council's review potential authorizations only apply to the 2040 planning cycle, and post-2040 areas would not be included in any action.
You sit here, I don't need help.
One moment. Sorry if you weren't able to hear me.
Oh, that's better.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Now you'll be able to hear all of my stuffiness. So, the proposed findings are that the plan conforms to metropolitan system plans, consistent with council policies, and compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units in affected jurisdictions. You'll find that the meeting schedule for the Environment Committee is, for review by the Environment Committee, is on Tuesday, February 11th, and by the full council on Wednesday, February 26th. So the proposed actions before the committee today is to recommend that the council authorize the city of Mayor to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect. That's the easy one. Secondly, to advise the city of Mayor that the council has reviewed the remainder of the plan and has found no regional system conformance or policy consistency issues at this time. Because the city does not have the legal authority to plan and zone for areas within Hampton, Hollywood, and Waconia townships identified in the staging plan for 2040 growth boundary map, also figure 6 of this report as tentative stage 1. Be advised that in the absence of an OAA, the city may not put those portions of the plan into effect at this time. At such time as the city of Mayor acquires jurisdiction of the lands planned for future annexation, future urbanization in township areas, either through an orderly annexation agreement or annexation by ordinance, the city will need to submit appropriate plan amendments to the council for further review and action. Any authorization of the City of Mayor's plan by the council refers only to the 2040 planning period, and any references to post-2040 or beyond 2040 growth areas are not included in any actions taken by the council. Be advised that the city may not put those portions of the plan into effect. Advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for surface water management, land use, and water supply. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions now that you can hear me.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Torres. Questions on that report? Any questions? Seeing none, Ms. Torres has proposed a series of actions related to the City of Mayor 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thanks, Ms. Torres. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Business item 3 is 2020-45. It's the Linwood Township 2040 Comprehensive Plan. And Ms. Wendell will present. Welcome.
Hello, good afternoon. I'll sit in the good chair over here.
Yeah, with the good mic.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. Before you today is the comprehensive plan for Linwood Township. I'm Corinne Wendell, Districts 11 and 12 in local planning assistance. I'd like to thank the township for their hard work on their plan and their partnership, and it's been a great process. So I'd like to commend them for their work. All right. So in terms of their plan, here are the regional systems located within the township. There's a regional trail search corridor that kind of goes from east to west across the township, as well as an existing east and north Anoka City Regional Trail that is found within the community. In terms of their community designation, Thrive MSP 2040 designates the township as diversified rural, and the township is located in northeastern Anoka County. So it's one of my northernmost communities in District 11, which is great. And so it's surrounded by the communities of Oxford Township, Lent Township, City of Stacy, City of Wyoming, City of Columbus, City of East Bethel, and Athens Township. In terms of their forecasted growth, so the plan includes a revised forecast for the township. The forecast is requested by the township to be revised upward in terms of their numbers, and the numbers are underlined within the table, as you see in Table 1. The council staff does find that the household forecast request is acceptable. The township does have land supply that accommodate the extra 100 households, and so the council is revising the township forecast simultaneous with the action of the plan this afternoon. For their existing land use, so the township's land use map is in Figure 3 in your staff report. So the township has about 23,000 acres. It's home to a significant amount of natural resources, large areas such as the Carlos Avery Wildlife Management Area in the south and eastern portions of the township. And then approximately 7,500 acres of the township are covered by wetlands and surface water, floodplain. It provides many natural amenities for the township, and also kind of limits development opportunities as well with that. And so for the future land use map, we don't have too many changes in terms of their land use. It's pretty much seamless into their 2040 map, and it establishes policies to protect that rural character that they have existing, maintain land patterns that ensure compatibility and function of uses, to establish land use patterns that reflect the natural amenities and the environmental constraints that they have. And then also the plan describes policies to protect local environmental systems, to maintain and enhance the natural amenities, and to protect those wetlands and natural habitat areas and groundwater. And so with that, we find that the plan conforms to the Metropolitan System plans, is consistent with council policies with the proposed forecast changes, and also is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. For this plan, so they will go on to the Metropolitan Council, full council on February 12th. They do not need to see the Environment Committee. And the proposed action is to authorize Linwood Township to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, to revise the township's forecast upward, as shown in Table 1 of the attached review record, and to advise the township that prior to final adoption of the plan, to replace the transportation analysis zone table on page 77 with a table provided by the council staff to reflect those revised forecasts. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Any questions on that report? Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the table with the forecasts, it says the estimated 2018 population was over 5,800, but the 2020 population is 5,390. Did they lose 400 people?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Wolf, that is, I'm going to get to the table in the staff report here. I believe they did have Originally, they had a decrease in about 100 households, and I don't know if that resulted in the 400 in population, and then they have requested the forecast upward from that estimation. That is definitely something that I can ask our Todd Graham, unless Director Brajas has insight.
I am,
Director Brajas.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember, I think maybe we have an error because what we have in our staff report is different than in your presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Just in those numbers,
Okay,
but not in the forecast request numbers.
I see.
So the change to the forecast request numbers are correct. But if you look at table 1 on page 2 of the staff report, the observed population is 5483, which is not nearly as high as 5831.
Right.
Okay.
And that forecast request was kind of leveling out right around at that level and carrying that forward. Age of household obviously plays, or age of population plays into their household number, population numbers total as well. And so you will see some population decline there while the household will increase over time. That's not uncommon for the township areas in our region.
Yep, Councilmember Wolf.
And then on the existing land use versus the future land use, there's a couple of sort of lavender colored areas that were institutional and are now rural residential agriculture. Has that use been kind of rolled into the rural residential agriculture, or is that a change of use?
Ms. Wendell.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Wolf, yes, that is correct. It's been rolled into that rural residential land use. So they were able to consolidate it underneath that land use designation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions on that report? Councilmember Johnson.
And again, on the existing land use to future land use, there's also, a private recreation spot on that, and that moves into rural residential agriculture. Do you know what that? It's just, it's interesting to understand what that was about.
Ms. Wendell.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Councilmember, I'm actually unsure about that chain or
No
the
worries.
kind of how they're adjacent
It's a
to
curious
each other.
issue. It's not. It's whatever it is. I'm sure it's great. It's just looks interesting. I wondered what it was.
Yeah.
No worries.
Director Brajas, maybe you have some.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember, we're surmising that it may be a 4-H camp in this area. It's an allowable use in the rural residential area, but not, the city has chosen to designate it as rural residential.
It happens to be where I went to 4-H camp when I was
Within
little.
the.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your expertise.
Cool. Any other questions, further questions on that report? Further questions? Seeing none, Ms. Wendell has proposed actions relative to the authorizing the Linwood Township 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Is there a motion, Councilmember Bento?
I move approval of the Linwood Comprehensive Plan.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on that motion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Councilmember Bento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two things. One, Linwood Township is the northernmost portion of my district, and it's a beautiful area. I hope to get back there more often. I went to a township board meeting a couple months ago, and when I drove into the parking lot, I kind of panicked because there were so many cars there. And I thought, oh my, did they hear that somebody from the Met Council was going to be here? And I got into the township board meeting room, and the room was packed, and then I really started to panic and almost started to sweat, except that it was really cold out. So it turned out that broadband access is a major issue in this part of our region, as well as other areas. And although it's not a part of the Metro Council's jurisdiction, it's something we're going to hear a lot about, and it certainly impacts quality of life and quality of work and staying connected. So I wanted to make that note. And then the second thing is that I just want to thank Corinne for being such a great sector rep. I met with Corinne and Angela shortly after I started last spring. They helped prepare me for my first visit. I went out to Hugo, and I just felt so confident when I walked in there that Monday morning, and I left feeling just as confident because I was I was just well prepared and had all the information I needed to not embarrass myself. So that's always a major accomplishment. And Corinne, we're going to miss you a lot, but I know you'll continue to do great things, and you're going to stay connected to us via your work in Little Canada. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Mizwano. Thanks for your work.
Thank
Very much. Thank you. Moving on, business item number 4, it's 2020-46. It's the Metro HRA Administrative Plan revisions, and Ms. Keogh will present. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair,
Good
council
afternoon.
members. Again, for the record, my name is Jennifer Keogh. I am the manager of the Metro HRA. And I'm going to remember my slides tonight. So I'm here to specifically talk to you about 2 revisions to our Housing Choice Voucher Administrative Plan. Specifically, I'm going to ask you to approve revisions that would allow us to adopt and implement small area fair market rents and to revise some language surrounding our mainstream voucher program. So just to reground us, I know I was here quite a bit over late summer into fall, but just to reground us about the Housing Choice Voucher Administrative Plan, remember that's our main policy document in the Housing Authority. So it's required by HUD, and what it does is it establishes local policies for administering the Housing Choice Voucher program. Again, it's our main policy document, and it's updated when HUD adopts new or revised regulations, and then again, as we, as the Housing Authority, determine a need for policy revisions. So that is what we are here today for. So the first policy revision I want to talk to you about is the adoption and implementation of small area fair market rents, or what HUD calls SAFMRs. We're going to call them small area fair market rents, but you're going to see those letters just to ground us on that. So back about a month or so ago, remember Director Smith was in here talking about payment standards and the implementation of small area FMRs. And so we are at the point of needing to adopt some policy language. So just to review, that those small area FMRs that we talked about, those are rent limits that are done by zip code, and they reflect your neighborhood rents more accurately. In 2017, HUD issued a regulation requiring the use of small area FMRs in 24 metropolitan areas, and then put in a provision that allowed housing authorities to voluntarily adopt the use of small area FMRs. We are the 3rd agency nationally to voluntarily adopt the use of small area FMRs. The implementation of those will provide us with greater housing choice for the families that we serve. And over time, if you recall the presentation from Terry, it will make the voucher program more cost effective. I think the fact that we are the 3rd agency nationally is, again, it's amazing. That the leadership within our organization continues to be innovative in the way that we're approaching cost containment strategies, offering choice for families, and you as policymakers to stand behind that and approving that, I think is very telling. So thank you for that. So the background, you approved the adoption of the use of small area FMRs back at our December 11th council meeting. And then the next step was that we needed to get HUD approval, and we received HUD approval on January 23rd. And so the final step for us to do this, to implement, is to have a revision to the administrative plan approved by you, our policymakers. So the 2 areas in our administrative plan that need revision is in Chapter 6 and Chapter 16. And I laid this out just so that we could be very clear. So in Chapter 6, we talk about how we apply the payment standards, and specifically the area that we're revising is when payment standards decrease. So with small area FMRs, if you recall, there are going to be jurisdictions, zip codes, where our payment standards go up significantly, And there are going to be areas where the payment standards do decrease. And we decided, you all decided, that we would hold those families harmless, meaning their payment standards will not change until they decide to move from the unit that they're being assisted in. So the policy language that we have put in here adopts that holding families harmless when a payment standard decreases. In Chapter 16, the language that we've revised is basically for us to voluntarily use the small area FM model. And so the language there is for us to adopt small area FMRs for our entire service area, including project-based vouchers. So the implementation for this is, remember we talked about an online tool. And so we have our online tool that is almost finalized, and then we will be testing the use of the online tool with our staff as well as with the members of our resident advisory board. So we have already set up dates to do those meetings in February. In March, we will continue with our engagement process. We'll be sending out communication. We will be hosting meetings within the community with our voucher participants, and we'll be doing engagement with key stakeholders. In April, we'll continue doing some communication. We'll be working with the folks in our communications department to produce information sheets and making the information as easily digestible and understandable for landlords, for service providers and the families that we serve. And then we'll be doing communication as well to our participants and to our landlords. And in June, you will actually see the implementation of the small area FMR. So it is a process to do this because of the timing of the calculations of rents that we do with families. We're on a HUD cycle. And so for us to be able to do this and do this well, the implementation will go into effect in June. And it's important to us that we set up systems so we can track the impact that we're having by the use of small area FMRs so that we can come back to you as policymakers and tell you what are we seeing with the adoption of small area FMRs. And the second policy revision to the administrative plan is just to clean up some language in Chapter 4 for the mainstream voucher program. Just to reground us, in November of 2018, we were awarded those 89 mainstream vouchers to assist non-elderly persons with disabilities who are transitioning out of institutional or other segregated setting at serious risk of institutionalization, homeless, or at the risk of becoming homeless. In November of 19, we were fully utilized with all of those vouchers and were awarded an additional 67 vouchers by HUD. So as we go forward and working with our partners in the counties, we needed to make some language change. So this language in Chapter 4 says that it's to remove the specific language about the population served and provide clarification of the counties used as a referral source. So it's really just, as we evolve, taking out specific language to make it easier for us to continue to get new vouchers and to implement them with various county partners. And so with that, I would ask for approval of those two changes to our administrative plan, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Keough. Questions on that report? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as we implement this and we learn as the Metro HRA, maybe I asked this before, will we share this and will it be relevant for the HRAs that are not Metro HRA cities and communities? So, I mean, we are opting in. Will there be discrepancies between how they administer their programs and ours? Or is there something that they, if ours works well, although I think they're more jurisdictionally bound, but I'm not sure how their rents are set in comparison to how we did it before we did this. I'm just trying to see, would there be any consistency or learnings we could apply with other partners?
Ms. Keough.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson. So with the payment standards, remember those come out based on fair market rents. So HUD sets the fair market rents, and what HUD says is housing authorities have the ability to set those payment standards between 90% and 110% of the FMRs. And then there's all these different, you look at the families that you're serving and how many are rent burdened, and then you balance that against choice and placement of vouchers. And so there's all these parameters that a housing authority looks at when they're setting their payment standards. A lot of it oftentimes comes down to budget constraints as well. And so all 10 of us do them differently. Some are set, maybe closer to that 90% because that's what that market bears, and the rents are lower, and some are at that 110%. So it really depends on jurisdiction. But do I think that there's lessons learned that we can share with our partners? Absolutely. I think Terry and I both agree the use of small area FMRs in the metro region could be a national model for a housing authority of our size to opt in. We were actually on a call with the president of Poverty Race Action Council, and he commended us for doing this. And he said, I think you will be a national model for doing this. So I think not only can we share with our 9 other housing authorities, but I think we'll be sharing this nationally as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Councilmember Cummings, then Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions. This is an interesting map of the 24 metropolitan areas. Are there commonalities, or how are those selected?
So HUD came out with, sorry, Mr. Chair, may I answer? Councilmember Cummings. HUD came out with the requirement in 2016 and then implemented in 2018. The 24 cities, it was designed from a desegregation standpoint. So those 24 cities were picked intentionally because of the segregation that was happening and the redlining. So it's to expand choice for voucher holders.
Oh, interesting.
Very interesting. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you. Another question, just do you have a sense of, I know that it will take some period of time to track the impacts. How much time do you think needs to pass before you can have some understanding of the impact that these changes will have?
Ms. Gio.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cummings, I think that we will track it on we could come back to you in a year. So let's say June of 2021, but I think we're going to see it over time. So if we hold families harmless and they stay, we're going to be looking at a different budget is when they start to make movement. I think we'll look at that. What we're really interested in is in areas where families have not been able to access because of the rent limits and because of our own redlining and things that have withheld families from being able to access cities that they want to. I think that it will be very interesting to see how many families are able to access those. I was in Eden Prairie doing a presentation in Eden Prairie and Chanhassen this past week and looking at the rent structure of what the average rents in those cities are in comparison to what our assisted rents are, and they're staggering. And it's because of payment standards, and families aren't able to access those. So I really do believe that's where we're going to see those impacts. With having our outreach team, which I know you met a member of our outreach team a couple of weeks ago, with folks like Ryan and her team to provide supports as well to be able to access those communities. I think coupling that together with our mobility program, I think we'll see, our hope is that we will see results in favor of families that want to make those moves have the ability to. They're not as limited.
Mm-hmm.
Just
my final comment. I think this is fantastic, and I think that the kudos to you and everyone of the entire staff, because I think that the opportunity to offer choice, there are so few ways that we can have those kinds of impacts, and I think this is just a really big step in that direction. And once again, I think the fact that that the Met Council are leaders in this nationally, it's not so much a surprise, but it is certainly worn as a badge of honor, I hope, because it takes creativity, it takes perseverance, it takes a lot of hard work,
takes a lot of partnerships, a lot of analysis. I mean, it is an amazing thing. So I thank you very much for all of the work done.
It's the leadership.
Yes, it's
I have
leadership.
all of you.
Yes, all of you.
Wonderful leader.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I ditto the comments that council members have said, and I also think that it's great that we're being innovative. Housing affordability is one part of the puzzle in terms of making ends meet, and if we can do what we can do and be a model nationally, that's great. I met with a leader in the northwestern suburbs area a few weeks ago with Terry Smith, and we talked about this program and what we can do as a Met Council to help make housing more affordable, to help make living more affordable. So again, kudos to everyone, and I will definitely be reporting this back and sharing it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This goes to this agenda item as well as the next agenda item, perhaps, but I was pleased to see the implementation plan, and I'd love to put it into our work plan that we continue to get updates on the rollout of small area market rents, because I feel like, I don't have a ton of experience on the council, but this year has just been, I feel like it's been heavy on housing stuff, like big housing changes, small area market rents being one of them, minimum rents and biennial inspections, and probably a million other things that are on the table and that we've made changes to. And it'd be great just to get kind of 6 months updates on how's it working? Is anything else that needs to change? What have we learned? These types of conversations would be helpful for me.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion? I just really want to add my congratulations and thanks to Ms. Keogh, your staff, to Ms. Smith, who's here as well, and your willingness to innovate and to be leaders nationally in this area and in so many. And several of us today were at the Minnesota Interagency Council on Homelessness meeting with the elected leadership from across the 7-county metro area. And some of the work that was held up as being particularly innovative and strategic was the work of our HRA and our Metro Public Housing Authority. And Ms. Smith was able to present to the entire group on some of the work you're doing. And so that innovation is being recognized across the state and across the region. So well done, well done. So we have a proposed action that the Metropolitan Council approve the revisions to the Housing Choice Voucher Administrative Plan to adopt and implement small area fair market rents and to revise the mainstream voucher program language. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. And we'll move on to our final business item. Excuse me. It's 2020-47. It's the 2020 Community Development Committee Work Plan, and Director Barajas will present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Council members, I don't have a pretty PowerPoint for you today, but I do have a really awesome Gantt chart that is very colorful. You may recall that at our last meeting in January, I came to you with a draft work plan and sought your advice and feedback on direction for this committee's work for this year. We also had drafted items that are a combination of the base level work that we do every year when we know what's going to happen, it's scheduled, or things that we respond to. So master plans, for example, comprehensive plans, we know they're going to happen. We don't always know when, but we save our time for those. We also have a number of initiatives that are in the works from this past year that continue to move over into this year's work plan, and then new initiatives that both our staff generated and are resulting from conversations with you as a committee and as the council as a whole through your conversations and drafting your goals this last fall and that you'll continue to work on this year as well. Housing being one of those that fits very squarely in Community Development Committee. I had also asked for some additional feedback in between meetings from some of you as I saw you, and also via email as well. So the work plan that you see in front of you reflects all of that refinement, as well as some additional refinement in timing and quarters and months from staff. We're in early in the year for some of our projects that are going to be planned for this year. So you'll see that reflected either as in the written document by quarter estimate, or in the visual document by more of a hatch line as tentatively scheduled. Some of them may come to you, especially on our list of initiatives, some of those items may come to you multiple times over that period, so more than once. And other items we think will be sometime in the second half of the year. So depending on your committee calendars and the business that we have in front of you, as well as being sure that we have enough time on a particular agenda to have a thorough presentation and conversation with you on those items. So the work plan you see in front of you is meant to reflect both the broad plan for the year, as well as have some flexibility and refinement throughout the year, both on the meeting to meeting schedule, but also as your priorities might change or as new things may arise, whether it's from legislative session and we get new direction, which sometimes happens, or whether it's from new priorities from you as a council as well, that we want to be sure that we're fitting in. So, having said all that, I do not believe you'll see anything new on here, but to Councilmember Lindstrom's point on our last item, you will see that we did schedule some time for reviewing how small area fair market rents are going later this fall, since we already have scheduled payment standards discussion on an annual basis for you. And so we wanted that to fit in October, November as part of that overall schedule. But as Jennifer had noted, putting them out in June, we don't know how much update we'll be able to give you in just a short period of time of implementation, but at least to let you know that it's been launched and how it's going at that point. But we do plan to continue to update you as part of that. That's where you'll see that in this calendar for this year. So with that, I would be happy to take any additional questions or feedback you have on this. But otherwise, I have a proposed motion for you to adopt the work plan as described in the body of this report, with the understanding that it is subject to modification as needed or as directed by the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Barajas. Questions on that report? Questions on the work plan? So I do have a question, Ms. Barajas, if I may. So the small work group met to look at the Livable Communities Act undistribution plan recently, and one of the conversations during that meeting was to allow for more lead time as we develop those year to year, and working with Ms. Beard as well. She's very eager and interested in approaching the work that way. And so I'm wondering, does that somehow appear here? I'm looking at the Lca section, but it's not as clear to me that we're building the time in to engage with our communities and things as we discussed in the work group.
Mr. Chair, council members, yes, I do have that in our staff work plan. I don't know if I have that in your committee work plan.
Great.
Oh, I do actually on page 3. I'm sorry. Yep. On page 3, at the top of the page, fifth bullet down is review and evaluation of the Livable Communities grant programs.
There it is.
And because we don't have a hard schedule on that, you won't see that necessarily with a hard schedule there, but you'll also see it on page 5 reflected in the Gantt chart as well. I just saw it and my eyes went across. Oh, here it is, like the 5th item or 6th item from the top there. Livable Communities Program Evaluation.
Thank you very much.
So then you'll see that through 2nd, 3rd, and 4th quarters.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. Councilmember Lindstrom.
One thing that perhaps we could add to the April agenda, where we're talking about the climate stats, is an update on what the council is doing to assist communities with brownfields, renewable energy on brownfields.
Ms. Barajas.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lindstrom, that is a great idea, and I think would fit in nicely with that. And I will confer with my staff that they have the availability for that. But I think that's a great connected action to go along.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Barajas, you read out a motion. Do you mind just restating that for us, please?
Sure. The proposed action, the top of your report, is that the Community Development Committee adopt the work plan as described in the body of this report with the understanding that it is subject to modification as needed or as directed by the committee.
Great, and that is the proposed action in the report.
Move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Great. And any discussion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you. Thanks for your work and for all the engagement. So now, committee members, will move into our information items. I know we're going to lose Councilmember Chambliss in the not too distant future. She has a Met Council related meeting she needs to attend. So our first information item is the Land Use Advisory Committee report, and that's going to be given by our colleague and liaison, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
So you guys already know what Land Use Advisory Committee does, right? So I won't read the slide off for you because you all know how to read. So we meet every other month, and so we had 2 meetings in this quarterly update. On November 21st, we got an introduction to the bus service allocation study to kind of prepare members to participate in the workshops that will be held in February, March, April, I think. I don't know the dates of the actual workshops, but wanting to have discussion between land use and transit, we figured they would be good people to participate in the study. We also got a report on the typology of suburban change, which is kind of a cool thing where they look at how different communities that are in their same part of the development progression can learn from each other. So they had like 13 different kinds of neighborhoods and or cities, so that if one comes up with a solution for a problem, they can share that information with the others. And staff is working on a website that will have the maps and issues related to each of those types of suburban communities so that people can look online and get a bunch of information. And then we worked on the draft Land Use Advisory Committee work plan, but we took a little different approach than community development. We started to talk about it, but one of the members said, why don't you just send out a survey? And so they made a survey, and on the things that we have to do, the staff was able to collect information from the members on how much background information do they need in order to make a good decision. And then they also asked the committee members on what topics might interest you in the upcoming year, so that if we have extra time after we get all of the must-do things done, or the time-sensitive things, that staff would have some idea of what sorts of topics the committee could do best to advise us on based on the interests of the members. So it was a sort of a top-down thing in what we have to do, but also bottom-up to find out what the committee members would like to do with the committee. Then on December 5th, we had a joint workshop with the Metropolitan Area Water Supply Advisory Committee, which I also chair, so I got to chair 2 different groups at one time. And we had 4 presentations on topics, including water supply related data and trends and comprehensive plans, a toolbox to support more effective drinking water protection, climate vulnerability assessment chapter addressing water supply resilience, and input to the Environmental Quality Board State Water Plan. So we had small group discussions after each presentation and then reported out, and staff is compiling that information to figure out what opportunities there are for future collaboration between MOSAC and LUAC. Then on January 16th, we finished up on the work plan because we had the survey results and that was approved. And then we had a very long discussion on determining affordable and life cycle housing goals. Good discussion. Generally, the group was supportive of what staff has been doing so far in working out those goals. And we'll be discussing that momentarily, I believe, in our agenda. So if there's any questions.
Great. Thank you for that report, Councilmember Wolf, and thanks for the work on behalf of the council. Any questions on that report? Any questions? Seeing none, thanks again. Thank you. Next information item is a discussion on the 2021 to 2030 Affordable and Life Cycle Housing Goals for Livable Communities Act, and Ms. Beard will present. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Tara Beard, and I'm manager of the Livable Communities Unit in the Community Development Division. And I get to have a couple conversations with you tonight. And this first one is very close to the exact conversation that I took to the Land Use Advisory Committee that Councilmember Wolf was referring to. And I just look forward to sharing with you what we've been working on and getting your feedback. So today's discussion will be an overview of the Livable Communities Act, including why we are talking about re-enrollment for the 2021 decade and the most important aspect of re-enrollment, which is negotiating affordable and life cycle housing goals. We'll have an overview of what those goals are, how we've determined them in the past, a summary of the conversations we've been having as we embark upon re-enrollment for the 2021 decade in the past few months, and then seek some feedback from you on the direction we're moving in and talk about next steps. So as a reminder, the Metropolitan Livable Communities Act, or LCA as we commonly refer to it, is a voluntary grant program that was adopted by the state legislature in 1995 to promote essentially broadly high living wage jobs, a full range of housing options, and compact and efficient development. It's important to note that participants need to be units of local government. Applicants can be county development agencies, but the city in which the project they're applying for must be a participating community for them to be able to access these funds. So it's really kind of, people talk about carrots and sticks, and this is sort of one of these tools that we have to offer a benefit to communities kind of in exchange for, supporting projects that support our policy goals, et cetera. It's a voluntary program, but it can often serve us in other conversations. I'll just share, for example, comprehensive plans that are complete and conform with council systems. We may authorize those to go into effect, but they may not be fully consistent with, for example, the council's housing policy. And LCA participation is one of those things that we can say, look, if you want to continue to be a LCA participant, you've received funds in the last few years, making these few more changes will bring your plan fully consistent with council housing policy. So it's a really helpful tool and lever that I think it's important to be aware of as we embark upon this conversation. There are 3 active LCA accounts. There's the tax-based revitalization account, which covers environmental investigation and cleanup. The local housing incentives account, which is specifically for supporting preservation and construction of affordable housing, and the Livable Communities demonstration account, which has within it as well a transit-oriented development account to fund those broader development goals that were in the previous slide. So as I mentioned, it's a voluntary program. You can see this map here as our current participating communities. There's 96 communities there. And so, the vast majority of communities that can participate do participate. But there are a couple of requirements to participate. So the first thing they must do is adopt affordable and life cycle housing goals. And so that's what I'm here to talk about today specifically. But there are a couple other requirements that are just worth noting. That is establishing a housing action plan that basically talks about how affordable and life cycle housing goals are going to be met. And then spending a certain amount of money that it's called an affordable and life cycle housing opportunity amount, which is calculated within statute and is an amount cities need to spend towards creating affordable housing opportunities to be eligible for LCA participation. But today we're focusing on the goals. If the housing action plan or the ALHOA amounts are of interest to you, please let me know and we can answer any questions offline. So why all the fuss? We don't re-enroll for LCA on an annual basis. We work on kind of a mass enrollment following our other decennial sort of policies and programs like comp plan updates, et cetera. And so we kind of do a mass enrollment every 10 years and determine the affordable and life cycle housing goals that cities need to adopt in order to participate. And so cities can certainly join in any given year. They don't have to enroll now or never for the decade, but there are 96 communities, and all of their affordable and life cycle housing goals last negotiated expire at the end of 2020. So if they want to be able to apply for any 2021 funds, they need to have adopted these updated goals by November 15th of this year, and that's in statute. So I'm going to talk a little bit later about the discussions we've been having in some of the places where there's different perspectives, but there's a couple kind of baseline principles that are not really, there's broad consensus about and kind of create the foundation for the conversation around what goals should be. So one of the key things to know, and this is something that we have always done with the goal determination, is that they feed off of the allocation of affordable housing that the council has determined as a part of forecasting and comprehensive planning. And that's really important to know because there is so much baked into how we forecast growth. And then how we determine the allocation of affordable housing need amongst communities within the region. And often what I hear from folks is we should really think about this when we're determining the goal. You know, are we thinking about transit? Are we thinking about existing affordable housing? And these are all things that are already baked into this allocation of need. And so using the allocation of need as a foundation for the goals keeps us consistent across our policies and our understanding, and it keeps it clear to everybody how it works. So I'm going to give you a brief reminder of how we allocate forecasted need for affordable housing so that you know that, what we're basing the goals on. So we calculate a forecasted growth by decade, and we have that decade's forecasted growth for the 2021 decade is approximately 119,000 households in the region, additional households in the region, and around 37,900 of those households will earn 80% AMI or below. So we've done the economic and demographic and forecasting to know what the need for the region is for affordable housing in 2021 to 2030. This is just new need for affordable housing. It does not address existing affordable housing needs. And so we start with that number, and that's about 33%. So the number of additional households earning 80% or AMI or below is about 33% of all households we're expecting to come to the region. So we start with a pre-adjusted allocation. We take a city's forecasted growth for that decade, and we start with that pre-adjusted across the board 33% or so shared. But we do make a couple of adjustments. We look at the existing affordable housing stock. If it's a community with a lot of affordable housing, more than a typical community share of affordable housing, their allocation will get adjusted down. If they don't have very much affordable housing compared to a typical community in the region, their allocation gets adjusted up. Either way, it's kind of a pendulum that always has to add up to that 37,900 households. We also make an adjustment if a community has a lot of low-wage jobs, but not a lot of low-wage residents. That's a sign that additional workforce housing and affordable housing is especially needed, and so there'd be a slight adjustment upward. And then the reverse is also true. So those are two additional adjustments we make that, again, will be baked into the goal determination because it will be based on the allocation of affordable housing need. Everybody with me?
Mm-hmm.
The other consensus point that I think is important to remember when we have a conversation about how to determine goals is that everybody, I'm sure there's an exception somewhere, but the vast majority of folks and the consensus that has been built is that goals should be determined using the same methodology across cities, that it really doesn't serve the purpose it needs to serve if individual communities have different criteria that they're factoring into their goal adoption. And I hear from staff all the time too, like this needs to be, how we've determined goals needs to be something I can translate clearly and communicate well to my elected officials as I take before them goals to adopt in November so we can participate. And if it gets too complicated and complex, it starts to get really, people start to get nervous and want to worry about it. So before doing too much outreach for how goals should be determined for 2021 decade, did some research on how goals were determined for the 2011 decade. And so like we're proposing this year, that we began with a community's 2011 to 2020 allocation of affordable housing need as sort of the basis from which goals should be determined. And then staff worked really closely with Minnesota Housing especially, but other stakeholders as well, to kind of do an analysis of what funding availability might look like. Just real high level, knowing that it vacillates from year to year, but what's kind of a reasonable amount of funding available for affordable housing in a typical year? And what's the cost of a new affordable unit on average? And just doing the math that way, there was an estimate of about 65% of the number of units that were allocated as future need. About 65% could be built with our best funding estimates for the coming decade. And so what you find in 2011 to 2020 goals are a range of numbers that go from about 65% of a community's allocation of need, because that's the reasonable amount of funding expected to be available. But then it's a range that goes from that low point to the high point of their allocation of need. And I think that that's an important distinction that we'll talk about in a minute as well, that creating that range. There were a couple of exceptions that I'll just point out so you don't call me and say, I looked at the list and that's not 65%. Minneapolis and St. Paul get quite a bit of additional tax credit allocation from the federal government, and so their allocation of need for both communities was set at 100% of their goals were adopted as 100% of their allocation of need. Dakota County also gets is a sub-allocator of tax credits and gets some additional tax credits, but has to distribute that across all of Dakota County. So their allocation started on the low range at 85% of their allocation of need. So that's how we did it before, and we kind of started conversations back in November with a group of an advisory committee group made up of 15 to 20 folks from different cities, different counties, Minnesota Housing, advocacy groups, metro cities, getting folks around a table to kind of revisit why we do this, remember, talk about kind of what goals mean for a community, how they are thought of, how they can be used, and talk about if it's time to change anything about how we determine goals as we look for towards re-enrollment for the 2021 decade. Also gave a presentation to the Land Use Advisory Committee, of course, and just want to ground us in the broad consensus around those baseline principles. We did say, okay, if we're gonna look at how it was done last year with this sort of last decade with this sort of 65% number of funding availability, I went through similar exercises with Minnesota Housing and some county finance staff to talk about what's a reasonable number what's a reasonable percentage to look at if we approach it that way this time. And so looking back about 5 years, in a given year of the funding available for affordable housing in the region, and applying that to a average estimate of the cost of a new affordable unit, we were able to say that number is somewhere in the 44 to 50% range. If we're going to talk about what's the funding available to meet the allocation of need, our analysis, again, very high level, but our analysis right now is that it would be a little bit less than what it was determined to be in the last decade. And so while there was some discussion about whether or not using funding availability as a determinant of goals was there, everybody felt fairly comfortable with that number and how we reached that number. Where there was quite a bit of conversation was about whether the goals should be the same as the need or based on funding availability. And so this slide gets at some of the conversations, some of the things we heard kind of in both of those directions. Folks that felt that the goal should be the same as the allocation of need felt that the goal would reflect the true significance of the affordable housing need and wouldn't kind of limit communities to feel like they had done their share if they reached their goal when they still were possibly far shy of their allocation of need. It's also important to note that there's no penalty if you don't meet your goal. There's no risk in having a higher goal. It doesn't hurt you in any way. And then there was conversation around the fact that cities are very embedded in their comprehensive planning process right now, and their housing elements are already deep discussions about how to address their need. And so they're in that space right now. And I heard from a couple city staff that said, we'll adopt our goals, whatever, that's fine. But what we care about is the need. That's what's in our comp plan. That's what we adopted as a need that we need to address. So that's fine. And I even had another city staff from a different city say, if actually, this is going to the other perspective. So hold on for a second. Sorry. So conversations around applying what funding availability estimates were to the allocation of need and using that to determine an LCA goal. The support was that it acknowledges the lack of funding to meet the need. Heard from a lot of folks that it really matters to cities that they're hearing from the Met Council that we realize they cannot build the need alone, that the LCA program is a program between us and cities. And so assigning sort of the allocation of need as a goal to cities, it can feel like we expect or think cities could build all those units by themselves. And so that was, a strong opinion heard. And then there were a couple of folks that even said, look, if you tell me, if I have to take to my council that the goal number is the need number, and we can't factor in funding availability, I think there's a really healthy chance we will just say, never mind. There's sort of some really, strong feelings about making sure that those relationships are kept open, and that, having the LCA relationship is a really helpful way to keep the conversation going, even if a local government's policies aren't 100% aligned with the council policies. That relationship is a good thing. But then I also had a city say, and this was the thing I was going to say earlier, that, if you set our goal as lower than the need, my community is going to stop as soon as we get that last goal unit built. And we're going to say we did it, and it doesn't matter. So it's interesting, there's not really one way of looking at it that meets kind of everybody's criteria and how you're talking about it. I think there's a really strong kind of advocacy concern about projecting goals as less than the need. But I think it's also important to note that this isn't necessarily a tool for these numbers aren't the numbers that go, for example, to the legislature to argue for more funding. There's plenty of research, much more sophisticated than this, to take to say, look, we don't have enough funding to meet affordable housing needs, because that was some folks' fear. So trying to kind of give you a flavor of the different opinions and conversations.
Ms. Beard, a question from Councilmember Bento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Back to the need versus share of need discussion around the definition of the goal. Is there a way of doing both?
Ms. Beard.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bento, you just stole my thunder. Yes, and no, thank you. I will be the first to admit that in embarking upon this, I was kind of like, a range, let's just have a number. A range is like, then everything's important, nothing's important. Range feels wishy-washy. Having gone through this entire process and read like editorials to the Star Tribune and letters to the council back in 2011, when we had almost this identical conversation with these identical kind of points of view, it kind of made me change my tune and realize kind of the genius of the range conversation. That's sort of having both, right? It's saying that, we recognize that the funding is limited, and here is a goal to reach toward, given what's realistic with funding. But don't forget that this is your need, and that number's still there, even if you reach the bottom end of that range.
Thank you, Ms. Beard.
So next steps around the goal. This is sort of a re-enrollment year, so it's a process. I don't need any actions from you today, but I plan to continue the conversation based partially in previous feedback and then the feedback I get from you today, and probably come back in March or April and say, this is what we're thinking, and this is the direction we're moving in, and literally have the numbers for you. And this is what the goal numbers would be using this criteria, and make sure that there's comfort with this committee with that, because that's when we'll start reaching out to cities and saying, this is it's not us telling you what your need is in a vacuum or your goal is in a vacuum. We've been having lots of broad conversations and lots of feedback, but recognizing we need a consistent methodology, and through these outreach materials or outreach efforts, we have determined that a reasonable goal would be this. Still plenty of room for back and forth and conversation. But what we'll be trying to do is get folks ready and prepared to adopt their goals for the 2021 decade by that November 15th deadline. And once local communities do that, we do come back to you for an action to also adopt those goals as a kind of mass re-enrollment.
Question from Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as that comes to us at the council, will we be able to see what our cities are, the previous decade's goals and where it's going for the next decade ahead of us? Will we be able to get a chart or something just so we understand, that progression through this process? And will there be opportunities for us to also plug into those cities? Or is that, because I haven't been through this process, I've been on the other side of it always. So just wondering how we plug in and just understand this is a shift, right? And we're moving forward.
Ms. Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Johnson. I think that is my goal, is to bring you the materials you need to be able to do that in that March and April, and be much more, this is just, I didn't want to come in with numbers hard and just say, this is what we think. I wanted to kind of see what you think, hear some feedback. But in March, April, I will be bringing with you, here's what we're proposing to take to cities to say, this is what your number will be, and how to talk about it. And so that will give you a start for some of those materials. I can always provide, and for some of these advisory committee meetings, I provided more analysis into so what were the goals last time and how many communities met them? And that's all really interesting and helpful data. But I think it also, I also caution that is helpful in determining how we should move forward, just because of, such things change so much. And so thinking about how funding, availability works, and just thinking about how the Great Recession impacted those forecasts that we base the goals on in the 2011 decade. So it's interesting, and I think it's valuable to track. But I have found it less helpful in thinking about how to determine goals moving forward than I initially thought.
Just one follow-up to that. So knowing too that, pre-Great Recession, production was there. Post-Great Recession, the production of all homes is not there. So the need is increasing. We're losing ground in many areas. So, my assumption naturally is that the goals and the need are going up, and not necessarily the resources. So cities, of course, are ground zero for all of this. They should know that. But, you get new elected officials that show up along the way that weren't around in 2011, and they're trying to figure all of this out. So I agree with you. Looking past isn't necessarily something, it's just, I think it'll be just interesting to see, this is what we were thinking in 2011 with what we knew. Wow, this is where we are now. And yet we still have to try to forecast another decade. And my only last question is, so these are the 10-year goals. And I should know this, but are they adjusted at all if something freaky happens in the economy, or somebody wins the lottery and gives it all to us or whatever? I mean,
Good luck with that.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Ms. Beard.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, if a community's forecast changes, for example, if they come in with a comp plan amendment because they have a big development coming that they weren't anticipating and it's significant enough to have cause a forecast change, or something isn't, some big jobs project doesn't end up happening, and their growth is not going to be as big as they thought, then we adjust their allocation of need down to be commensurate with their new forecasted growth number. And the goal, it would be reasonable for the goal to be adjusted commensurately, I think. We don't have a practice of kind of, there's a huge recession, let's take everybody and relook at it. That's certainly not something we aren't allowed to do. It's not something we've done in the past, but I imagine that's something we talk about if we were in conditions like that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And following up on that, there are a lot of communities in the last decade that had nowhere near the growth that they thought they were going, or that we thought they were going to have, and that they thought they were going to have. But many of them didn't bother to adjust their forecasts because there's no penalty if you don't meet your forecast, so it would just be extra paperwork. Had they wanted to come in, their number would have been adjusted down, but most of the communities that were in that situation didn't bother to adjust their forecasts. I would also say that I had asked, so, we projected how much money was going to come in for affordable housing. Did we track whether we actually got that money? And nobody knows how that number 10 years ago was figured out. So I would urge that this time we do some documentation of how that number is figured out so that at the end of 10 years we can say, did the money come in that we thought was going to come in or not? I suspect that it was less, but we don't know because nobody remembers how the other one was computed. I've also been very deep in the weeds on this and looking at affordable housing production by city and how much of that was with livable communities grants and whatnot. And it's fascinating digging in the weeds because some communities only built affordable units if they got a livable communities grant. Their number of communities that got a grant for livable, or number of units that got a grant for livable communities, and the total number of affordable units are the same number. And there's other communities that got no livable communities grants, but still built huge amounts of affordable housing in their community without livable communities grants. So I think it'd probably be good if we shared that spreadsheet that I've been trudging through so that you guys can dig in the weeds too if you would like.
Thank you, Councilmember Wolf. I think when we were talking about this before, I think I asked you this question about if the data you were looking at identified the sources of the dollars for affordable housing, and I think
it only
did not.
has if it gets a livable communities grant or not.
not.
It doesn't have a breakdown
Okay, cool.
of the other finance.
Yeah, that would be fascinating to see.
Sure.
Committee members, other questions? Yeah, Councilmember Bento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kind of piggybacking on what Councilmember Wolf was asking, is there any way of knowing if a city where the number of households with affordable households, if that is this is probably not available, maybe it is, whether or not there's a connection between that and getting the city to dip its toe into affordable housing in a meaningful way? Is it a way of luring them into caring and doing something? And maybe that's part of the rationale as to why the numbers match?
Councilmember Wolf.
Mr. Chair, like I said, it's all across the map. I mean, there are some communities that got no money but built a bunch of units. There's some communities that got a lot of money. They built some affordable units, but if you look at the overall numbers, 55% of the housing units that were built that in developments that included livable communities grants were market rate. Okay. And only 28% were affordable below 60%, and another 17% affordable between 60 and 80%. Yeah. So, like TBRA, you get points for having affordable housing, but it's not specifically for affordable housing. And the demonstration account grants, you also get points for having affordable housing, but it's not necessarily for that. The only grants that we have that are specifically for affordable housing is LHIA. Those ones are only for affordable housing, but the other ones can be used for any type of development. And so it does, even though you have to agree to support affordable housing to qualify for the program, most of the money goes to other things besides affordable housing.
Thank you. Councilmember Bento? Councilmember Lentz?
Just curious, is that a spreadsheet that you built yourself, or
No.
did you get it from you created it?
I'm not that deep in the weeds.
It sounds
I
like
get them
you
from
are.
staff. Staff gave it to me, and then I dig through it. I don't generate my own spreadsheets generally.
It's very impressive. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, committee members, we can share that.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
With you. You can see that.
Thank you. Thanks, Councilmember Wolf, for bringing it to our attention. So, Ms. Beard, did you want to present these questions, or are we sort of talking around them? Your questions for discussion?
Mr. Chair, yeah, I think we are sort of already talking around them. I guess I would be, I would ask, before we close the conversation, to if anybody has strong feelings about how the goal should be determined, either in the ways I've discussed or in ways I haven't discussed. That would be very helpful for me.
Great. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have strong feelings that we should stay with the same approach as last time, where the bottom range of the goal is tied to the funding, and then you can have the top range is the need. There were several communities that dropped out back in 2011. Shakopee was one of them, and Shakopee had the most affordable housing of anybody in Scott County, but the number they were given was so huge, they were like, forget that, and I don't think we want to do that to communities. It's better to be cooperative. And I also think that it's a good idea if we have some discussion with cities now and not wait until here's your number, so that they feel like they're a little more a part of the discussion. So we're doing it with them rather than at them.
Thank you, Councilmember. I agree with Councilmember Wolf on both counts, and it's important to be pragmatic and put a number that will encourage participation and at least not discourage participation. But I do think it's important that somewhere it actually expresses the real need.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the range that you're talking about, Ms. Beard, I think that's important. And I learned something interesting today at the Interagency Council on Homelessness, which I didn't know, which is kind of a counterintuitive dynamic, in that when the economy is doing well, homelessness goes up. And I just thought that was really interesting. And so there's more competition, rents go up, there's more competition for the units. And so I'm trying to form that into a response to one of your questions, Ms. Beard, and I'm not doing a very good job of it, but it seems like it's another dynamic within the environment or within the ecosystem that might have some impact on our goals. And so you do look at economic projections and things like that. That's part of the consideration. Okay. I guess I'll see how it goes. When not having done this before, it's interesting to learn. Councilmember Johnson.
And this is probably coloring way outside the lines, but because it's a big piece of this in this economy, and the need is because production is so low. But our relationship in this program is with cities, but cities don't control nobody controls the private sector or each other for that matter. But are we gathering data, or are we trying to loop in other partners in alignment to, you set a goal, but if you don't, and it's not necessarily our job to have the complete strategy to get there. That's a whole nother conversation. But I'm just wondering, are other sectors, is the private sector at all, their data or anything brought in consideration of, the need, the goals, but how do we get the barriers, I guess, is what I'm trying to come across. Like, how do we factor in, the known barriers right now, and ultimately where we're still trying to go? Is that a thought process at all in this?
Ms. Beard.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, I think it's absolutely a thought process we have. I think we apply it in some of our other ways outside of negotiating goals for LCA participation. I think, we will be having this annual conversation about what to prioritize in our Livable Communities Act programs, and that's where I think it's really relevant to have a conversation about, where's the economy right now? How are our dollars best used given the context? What are the developers telling us are the barriers, and factoring that into the criteria as much as what cities are telling us are the barriers. So, and then the housing policy staff also work, all the time to just, be finding the technical assistance that is most necessary and most applicable given the state of things as they are. So, absolutely yes to all of the above. I think, goals are this fairly static number, very high level for 10 years. They're necessary to think about and adopt, and required, per statute to do as a part of the process. But I think those deeper questions get into our, get us more in the weeds with some of the ways that we touch things more intimately.
Sure.
It's the only word I can think of. Sorry.
And thanks. And Ms. Beard, I'd really like to lift up also what Councilmember Wolf said about engaging with some of our communities earlier rather than just when we have a number for them. And, you know, for my district, I only have 2 cities in my district, so it doesn't seem like that daunting of a task, but I know in others it is. And so I don't know, I'm sure within your staff and you have the expertise to sort of, are there samplings of cities, say eligible cities that are underusing it, or maybe with some of the data that Councilmember Wolf was talking about as a way to say, okay, here's an example of a city that's underusing it. Here's an example of a city that's using it very robustly, and sort of gather input from that sampling. Councilmember Cummings and then Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And sort of piggybacking on that, when you say, do you have thoughts on how to best reach out to cities regarding goal determination? How has that been done in the past? Is the determination made and then, oh, we get this in the email? Or how has this been done in the past and how might we be doing it differently?
Ms. Beard.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cummings, that I might have to rely on Councilmember Wolf or Director Barajas to share exactly how that was done in 2011. But to this, to this process, we had a meeting in November and a meeting in December that had about, of the 15 to 20 folks, probably 10 were city staff. And my goal whenever I put together an advisory committee is to have at least one community from every county. So that's part of it. And then I did get a couple of comments from city staff that watched the presentation. I'm sorry, that wasn't about this, but losing track. Sorry, too many info items. But I did have a great conversation with Patty Nauman of Metro Cities last week, and we talked about in this space between today and March, April, when I return, having a deeper conversation with more of the communities that they engage with more frequently. You know, when I reach out for advisory committee members, I'm looking for a breadth of views and perspectives, but I'm still somewhat limited to folks who will drive to St. Paul and have a conversation with the Met Council. And sometimes what you need to hear is exactly what we need to hear is from folks that aren't maybe willing to come down and talk about it. And so, I definitely think that a meeting with a broader array of cities is going to happen. But, to that end, we can also do emails. We have a Planet Blast on a monthly basis that sort of gets at like a different group. There's some triangulation I think we'll do. But I hear what you're saying. Get the word out to more folks, get their feedback, have less folks. Let's try to minimize the number of folks that first hear of it when they get a letter in April or May.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you. It just as a follow-up, so when you say you approach Metro or you work with Metro cities and get some of the active participants who are willing, I think our goal also needs to be the ones who are not active in a Metro city. And you might be able to have success by reaching out to some of those cities through us.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
I know, and I don't know if they've been in or not, but one of the communities that I represent, and I was talking about some of this, and they're like, oh, please count us in when you're going to have that conversation, the next conversation. So we need to be looking beyond the usual suspects and bring those in who maybe perhaps have not traditionally been involved in the conversation. And through us, I think we can be helpful.
Yeah, we have the map right here.
Councilmember Lindstrom.
Well, you stole my thunder a little bit too, because I was going to suggest connecting with Metro Cities. How about that? Looks like you've already done that, and applaud you for already having these stakeholder meetings. A couple other things. So, League of Minnesota Cities, they have a number of listservs. There may be a listserv that's related to this, like related to a listserv for community developers or planners. If they could slice it to just the Metro somehow, that might be one way to reach out. Or think about where elected officials are already gathering, like the North Metro Mayors Association or the Regional Council of Mayors, and get 10 minutes with that group, with those groups. Yeah, but just kudos on already having these stakeholder meetings and meeting with LUAC. I mean, you're already connecting with local government officials. So those are just a few ideas.
Thank you.
Cool. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am blessed with two counties that collect up on a regular basis. And if you give me something that I can email out to those people and find out if they want more than just an email and want a presentation of some sort, I would be happy to do that to my counties.
Well, thanks, Councilmember Lynch.
Scale is probably one of them.
Scale and the Dakota County Mayor Managers.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson.
And just as I look at my district, you know, there are cities that aren't participating right now. I think Corcoran might be interested. I meet up with them in various ways too, but even if it's just a one-on-one, especially for those that aren't, or if there are any concerns of some that may no longer want to, I'm happy to do whatever you need me to do. So I'm just trying to be helpful if I can.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just go back. I'm always interested in the anomalies, and if there's a community that is really using these, that's eligible and is really using them, and if there's one that isn't, I just always think there's something to be learned from those anomalies. Cool. Anything else? Are you getting what you need here, Ms. Beard?
Yes, thank you so much.
Cool.
That's great.
And seeing no one else requesting to speak, we'll move on to our third and final information item. It's the 2020 Annual Livable Communities Program funding levels and schedule. Ms. Beard.
All right. Let's see if I can get my presentation straight. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
So this conversation is a continuation of the conversation we had a couple weeks ago as we gear up to adopt the 2020 fund distribution plan, which will tell us the criteria and schedule we use to allocate LCA funds for this year. So as you recall, I was here on January 21st, and we specifically talked about scoring criteria and some changes and things to explore there. And I promised you I'd be back, and I am today to talk about fund allocations and grant schedules. I will be back again a little over 2 weeks from today with a final, hopefully, FDP that you are comfortable and feel well informed about, asking for your recommendation for the full council to approve on February 26th. So this is another version of a slide that makes its way into most LCA presentations. Just to kind of ground us, we've got the three accounts, active accounts, the Lcda Livable Communities Demonstration Account. It is funded through local tax levy. It funds development, pre-development, and specific transit station areas around transit-oriented development. The local housing incentive account, our account primarily or solely for affordable housing, also funded through local tax levy as defined in statute, funds specifically affordable housing. And then the tax-based revitalization account, which is also funded through local tax levy, but specifically fiscal disparities. And if you want to know more about it, there are finance staff here to help. And that money, of course, goes to cleanup investigation and the SEED program that we've discussed. So I'm going to kind of walk through this table here. Historically, the annual fund distribution plan has been comprised of both the statutorily authorized amount and then some programming of reserves that can be added to some accounts. And some of the consideration, of course, is, well, is this an account where we tend to get a lot more applications than there is funding? How much of reserves have built up at this point in time? And that can vary from year to year. So we're kind of at that stage right now where it's time to look at, here are the base amounts given in statute or adopted in budget that we're starting from, but there are some reserves available to program that we could consider adding, and so do we want to do that or not? So the 2019 line is showing what we allocated in the different programs for 2019, inclusive of both authorized statutory amounts and additional reserves that were invested. So TBRA got 5.9 million, LCDA had 12.5 million, and LHIA had 2.5 million. If we're starting over in 2020 with what's just authorized with our kind of baseline, if you will, we start with 5 million for TBRA, 11.8 million for LCDA, and 2 million for LHIA. And the little asterisk for LHIA is just to note that only 1.5 of that is defined in statute. An additional 500,000 was added in the budget for 2020 last year. So it's not a statutorily authorized amount, but it is authorized in the budget already. So then when we look at what we have to potentially add to the programs, there are restricted reserves. And those are generally going to be projects that were completed under budget or where the project wasn't able to go forward. And so the funds were returned to us after they were awarded. And that money really needs to stay in the, our practice has been for that money to stay in the pot that it came from and be used how it was intended. But there's also unrestricted reserves, which are more traditionally going to be interest earnings, and that is more flexible money that could be moved in to any account, potentially.
I'm sorry, Ms. Beard, could you go back to that slide, please? And I know I might be asking a very, very simple elementary question, but let's say we were sitting in these chairs at this time in 2019 and then looking at the 2018 budget and the 2019 authorized budget. Would we be even looking at similar funds available for additional programming? Is this what it looks like pretty much every year?
Mr. Chair, it's not usually drastically different. I really focused on looking at the last 5 years of fund distribution plans before I came to you today so that I could, with some accuracy, say this is generally what it's looked like. You know, and 2018 was a little unique. There was, it was kind of a bumper year where there was like $4 million additional dollars put into the programs. $2 million went into Lcda, and $2 million, I believe, into TBRA. You know, I can't speak exactly to why, but I think, you know, every year we sort of take a look. Is there a greater need than we've, you know, that we're seeing in a certain arena? Do we have more reserves than we necessarily feel like we need to hang on to? You know, and then it's the appetite of the council and the tolerance of the council for that kind of spending.
Thank you. Thanks.
So just to make sure I did answer your question, other than 2018, this is fairly typical.
Pretty much, thank you.
More or less. So I thought I would ground the conversation moving forward with just sort of a high level, how do we want to think about this, you know? And it's kind of like how you want to balance your own checkbook. Do you want to spend every dollar you've got and, you know, live life to the fullest? Do you want to be kind of, you know, modest and save a little but spend a little? Or do you want to be fairly conservative and only spend what you have to and save for a rainy day? And that's kind of how we can look at the spectrum of funding allocations that we could potentially make for 2020. So just some brief, fairly obvious kind of observations of the pros and cons of those different approaches. Really, the only thing I'd want to call out is, as you know, and as Chair Lilligren, you even brought up in the work plan conversation, we are really anticipating a lot more program evaluation and conversation about the LCA program in general throughout 2020. So, you know, in considering whether we sort of program all of our reserves or none of our reserves, you know, the idea of preserving something for some creativity, some innovation, some pilot projects that might come out of the conversations this year is something I would ask you to keep in mind. So now looking at it fund by fund and looking at what's possible, so what's available for each fund to add to if we were to add all of their restricted funds, if they have any, and all of the unrestricted funds. Looking at the local housing incentive account, you know, I want to note that this council has talked explicitly about increasing council investments toward affordable housing, and that we have never not received enough applications to use every drop of the LHIA money. And for over 5 years, we've been consistently adding anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million to that fund, and it continues to be just a drop in the bucket. But if we stuck with what's authorized right now between the statute and the budget, we would put $2 million in the FDP for LHIA.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Councilmember Johnson.
And to just use some phrasing you used a couple slides ago, are we in a rainy day right now? I mean, you know, I mean, things are pretty horrible out there. And I just know that there are efforts to provide affordable housing and we can't fund it all. So I just am trying to figure out, you know, with the need so high, and I think there is, you know, an awareness and a concerted effort out there. I just wonder if this is the moment where it's a rainy day or it's a thunderstorm. So just curious, it's more of a high level.
Ms. Beard.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, I have no comment other than I share that kind of inner dialogue.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So with that, you know, looking at a spectrum of options, $2 million is already set for LHIA. Past practice would be maybe adding another 500,000. If we added $1 million to $3 million, that would be the highest, certainly in the last 5 years that we've put in LHIA. So that would be pretty significant. But if we were decided that this is the time to go big, then potentially 5.5 million could be added to that base of 2 million for a total of $7.5 million in LHIA funds. And I will, once I kind of get through these, I go back to a slide that includes all the funds. So if we're looking specifically at LCDA investment options, you know, that 11.8 million or thereabouts in past years, we've been consistently since the TOD program was created in 2011, offering 5 million to the TOD LCDA projects. And we're seeing that that's about right sized. There are some years where we get a few more applications than we have funding. There's some years where we don't get quite enough applications for funding. We put in the FDP that LCDA TOD funds that aren't used can be added to the LCDA pot, which is a couple of weeks later in the grant cycle, and that's sort of by design. But all that is just to say that staff doesn't recommend awarding more than 5 million to TOD. So as you consider whether you want to add to LCDA, I would encourage you to think about what to add to the regular LCDA program only. So again, we start with 11.8 million, usually get more applications than we have funding for in LCDA regular program. In past practice, we would maybe add $1 million. Last year, we offered 12.5 million, for example, total. But the largest possible, if we were to put everything we have in the pot toward LCDA specifically, would be an additional 10.5 million. So that would look like close to 15 million for LCDA regular and that same 5 million for TOD. If we look at TBRA, we've got a 2020 authorized budget amount of $5 million. TBR is the most recent grant cycle you've seen recommended awards for. So you may recall that we normally get more applications than we can fund for TBRA. Last year, we added $900,000 to that $500,000 base for TBRA funds. And as you saw, we still had more applications than we could fund. Past practice has been to add about $1 million to $1.5 million to that 5 million. But keep in mind, inclusive of that would be any money that went toward the seeding equitable economic development program. But if we wanted to put all of our available funding toward TBRA, it would look like an additional $7 million. So a total of $12 million, some portion of which could be put towards the seed program. So we're back to that, a similar slide to the first one, looking more at recommendations for 2020. So these are kind of, you know, how is staff thinking about this? But obviously need and welcome your feedback. Again, starting with the 2020 base, only in that top line, the authorized budget, what we've got right now for the 3 accounts, looking again at what's available to program in restricted reserves and what's available to program from unrestricted reserves. This recommendation is sort of that moderate approach where we certainly plug some of our reserves into the programs, maybe a little bit more aggressively in LHIA than we have in the past, but we don't program all of our reserves and recognize that, you know, any money we move from either restricted or unrestricted reserves into the program is gone. It's not there next year necessarily. So it's not there next year at all. So keeping that in mind and knowing some of the ideas that might spring up in 2020, bring this recommendation before you. So adding $1 million to TBRA, and actually, next slide, even more specifically, if we were to add $1 million to TBRA, staff would recommend that $250,000 go to seed, recognizing that it hasn't gotten as many applications as we've offered funding in the past, but that we want to spend some more time looking at what a program that could be more successful looks like. And then a $5.75 million for TBRA, so just $150,000 or so less than what we offered for TBRA in 2019. If we added $2.2 million as a recommendation to LCDA, again, I would recommend keeping the TOD fund at $5 million. So putting all of that into the regular LCDA gives $9 million for LCDA and the $5 million for TOD. LHIA, adding an additional $1 million to that would create a $3 million pot to put into Minnesota Housing's consolidated request for proposals, which would be the largest LHIA investment ever made, and kind of all put together, given how many TBRA and LCDA funds do contribute toward affordable housing construction, would certainly be getting at that 40% of increased investment that is discussed in the draft goals. So this is where I'll stop and look for some feedback and questions before we start talking about schedules for 2020.
Thank you. And Ms. Beard, so the recommendation that you're showing us does show an increase in every category, correct, over 2019, correct? And then I'd love to hear from committee members of their input. One of the big variables is the state legislative session. And the governor has made a considerably high pass, was it 260 million, something like that?
76 million.
And not a penny less. That's what the lieutenant governor and the commissioners were saying today. So there's that. I would just put that out there. But committee members, discussion. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think given that the LHIA always comes down to zero, there's never anything extra. This council has said in every way, shape, or form that that is a really important initiative for us, that it makes great sense to increase that and have that be a focus and an impact that we can make as we're setting our goals for the next 3 years. That was a huge goal, was to be really specific about that. So to me, that seems like a really, really important thing that we look at.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
I will second everything that Councilmember Cummings said. And to your point, or whoever said it, go big. Minnesota Housing Commissioner Jennifer Ho said go big so everybody can go home. Mm-hmm. The governor's going big. And I think if we can step up and do it, we know again, it's oversubscribed. Anything we can do to get in the ground now is going to, I believe, save on construction and housing costs down the road. It doesn't solve everything, but it really shows that we're committed to that goal that we've set this year as a council. And, I really trust staff's recommendations on the other ones as well. We're undersubscribing or not getting the requests in. I don't know. Again, I know we've talked a little bit about that and how we figure that out. We'll figure that out. So, but I would support.
Thank you. Councilmember Lindstrom, then Councilmember Wolf.
Dangerous to be looking for me for math related types things, but on this slide, I think the middle one should be 14 million LCDA, not 13 million. Mm-hmm. So we just gave ourselves another $1 million. Way to go.
You win the gold star.
Good job, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Yeah, right. It's a test.
Thank you. Is it Councilmember Wolf?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with staff's recommendation on the TBRA and the LCDA with the math correction. But I don't think we go big enough on LHIA. I think it should be 2 million extra instead of 1. I've been pushing to put more money in that account the whole time I've been here. And I've been able to get little bits, get a $500,000 of general fund or $1 million of general fund. But using the unrestricted reserves, I mean, like we were talking about before, when the economy is good, that's when the low-income housing situation is the worst. Mm-hmm. And all of those other pots of money can go to all kinds of development and not necessarily affordable housing. If we mean it about affordable housing, then I think we should put 2 million of the unrestricted reserves in instead of just 1.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Bento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Councilmember Wolf. And not only are these funding recommendations, but they're quality of life recommendations for families and people, and in particular kids. So I totally agree. I'd like us to go bigger.
Thank you. Councilmember Lindstrom.
I agree as well. So if we added another $1 million to LHIA, what would our reserves look like? Mm-hmm. And then could you talk a little bit about what's the agency of having reserves in the first place?
Ms. Beard. sorry.
Does it go to our credit rating, or, you know, I mean, is it just the rainy day fund? Why have reserves?
Ms. Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Lindstrom, great questions. I will note that the total of reserves we were looking at is about $12 million. So it's the staff recommendation was to add 5.2 of that $12 million to across the funds. Adding another million to LHIA would take that to 6.2 million. So it's just a little over half of what the total amount is available for additional programming, if that's helpful at all to put into context. As to sort of, you know, why have reserves, you know, I certainly invite Director Augustin Hubner to come up, but my understanding is that
Here she comes.
there she comes, yay.
She's looking ready.
I'll take a little stab, and then she can correct me. You know, that it's the interest, the way the interest is allocated across the council is not by fund, you know, individually by account by account. I'm going to stop right now.
Ms. Augustin Huber, thank you. You know, it's kind of, yeah, that microphone's
I'll
a
get
little
close.
funky.
So reserves are there for a couple of reasons. One, it won't impact our credit rating. That's really, the council has reserve policies, and that'll take care of us on the broad level. I think when you're looking, or I guess my recommendation as I'm looking at this, it's really going to harken back to what Tara talked about earlier, is what do you want to invest now versus what do you want to maybe hold on to if you're having some broad policy discussions in 2020 to invest in 2021. You know, think of the reserves as one-time money. You know, so as you're investing these, we just really want to be smart about when we are investing and really thinking about, are there policy changes that you potentially are going to engage in 2020 for implementation in 21 and 22? Because once these one-time reserves are gone, they're gone. So, and I guess I would just offer that to weigh. And the other kind of smaller piece is when you're calculating interest. You know, if you have less of a balance, you're going to earn less interest, but I would say that's more marginal in nature.
Thanks. And Ms. Augustin Huber, what's the pace or the schedule that these reserves refresh or rebuild?
Yeah.
So we're looking at 12 million this year. If we spend half that, what's the balance going to be next year? Please.
Council member, committee members, it depends how much we spend.
Okay.
So it's going to be, so what happens is we continually get income and grantees continually spend, and the amount of interest that we earn is going to be really a balance of the two.
Sure.
So one of the things that I could bring back or email to committee members is, on average, how much have we earned every year? I don't have those numbers with me, but I can certainly follow up with that, if that would get to your question.
It would, yeah, please, yeah. Councilmember Johnson, then Councilmember Wolf.
I think you were ahead of me. Were you ahead of me? I think she might have been ahead of me, so I'm being very careful before I.
Okay. Did
I'll
you want her to go?
Well, I'll jump in.
Okay.
And then,
Go ahead.
So I know I've been told this before. So where did the funds originate from? To begin with, if it's one-time money, I mean, I know it's one-time money if we spend it, because there's probably not a steady stream that's going to replenish it in a year's time. And I understand from a policy position wanting to put some money aside or keep some money aside for future incentives around some new policies we might create. But I'm just so compelled by the fact that there are more worthy projects that come forward that are not funded now, that I just feel like I want to bet now on what we've got and figure out a way for the future too. The need is so great. The need will continue to be great. But I just, that's my thought. So I'm just trying to figure out, where did the money come from? And that's it.
And who wants to take it? Ms. Augustin Huber, is it?
So, Chair, committee members, it's going to be coming from a couple different sources. So if you look at the base budget, that is going to be replenished every year on a pretty steady cadence. So there's going to be the money that's in statute, and then every year as part of your annual budgeting process, there are those, the council engages every year and strategically where they want to invest other dollars. So think of that as your pot that is going to replenish pretty reliably at a pretty steady pace every single year. Then you're going to get, for your reserves, you're going to have a combination of interest earnings. And those have been pretty steady over time. And the second place where we're going to get quote unquote new money is if projects come in under budget or if projects are relinquished, if they just can't be built. And I don't have the numbers with me over right now either, but over time there are projects almost every year that the grantee has to turn back in the money because the project scope changed or because they were unable to move forward with it as planned. So I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but if you're looking for the argument to invest them, I think you've all had that. If you're looking for the counter argument of potentially why not to, I think that's just what I offered. It's not necessarily an opinion of what you should do, but those would be the balance points.
Thank you. Councilmember Wolf, and then Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I kind of was doing that balance in my head of current versus future, and that's why I don't say use every bit of the because the restricted reserves are turn back money that just didn't get allocated to somebody either because their project came in under budget or because they just never happened. And that like they said, that varies from year to year. But if I wasn't thinking about the future, I'd put every bit of that into this year. But because we're looking at potentially making significant changes with our deep dive and talking with communities about changes to livable communities to make it more effective, that's why I didn't say just use the whole bit. In the time that I've been here, it's varied. When the Dayton Council first came on, they created the TOD program and put in like $13 million of reserves. Because under the Plenty Council, they had just been consistently doing the same amount every year. And if turnbacks came back, it just went into reserves and it sat there to the point that there was a huge amount of money to use up. Even with being pretty aggressive in how we operate the program, we still have significant reserves. So I think it's okay to use that amount that I recommended this year, knowing that there is money available for next year and there will be more most likely coming in as far as turnbacks or unspent money for future.
Thank you. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given this big picture, I think it's really helpful to get all of that. But I would take the 2 million and go to 2.5 because I think what you're saying, the need is now. The need is huge. The need can't be overstated, and we have shown that and we've talked about as a council. We've talked about where you put your money is where your values are, and this certainly reflects what our values are. And I think another $500,000 isn't going to really hurt too much else, but I think it can do a world of good in housing. And I think we've shown our commitment being first money in on the emergency December initiative. And I think, again, we talk all the time about being, we're leaders and we're bold and we're out there, and this is one of our really big priorities. So I would actually advocate for 2.5.
So a total of 4.5 LHA. Okay, thank you.
As well.
All right. Councilmember Bento.
Okay, now I'm confused. So a total of 4.5 for LHIA. Okay, all right.
Or 4.
So an additional 2.5.
I suggested 4. We have 2 for 4.5.
Yeah.
Did you have thoughts on that, Councilmember?
No, I'm just glad to hear that there's a consensus among us that we want to go big because I'm concerned that at some point somebody's going to say, with all of our affordable housing needs in this region, what are you doing sitting on this nest egg? And how can you go to the legislature and ask for more? So I think we gotta use the resources we have in a good way, and I think we can, and I think we'll be applauded for it. But that's not the reason to do it. It's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Councilwoman Renee. It was already going to be a good story, right? It was going to be the largest LHIA
Yes.
allocation ever, right? And I think this increase of $1 million, or if it's 1.5, it is timely. Again, I just bring up, we don't know what's going to happen at the legislature. We do want to have some of our powder dry in case there are efforts or initiatives that we can leverage our funds with next year. So I think the wisdom of Councilmember Wolf's approach is don't put everything in there, even if you want to put everything in there. But do you want a number from us? Is that what you're looking for, Ms. Beard, or?
Mr. Chair, what I'd like to be able to do is have numbers in the proposed FDP before you on the 18th that you're comfortable recommending adoption for. And I mean, that could be after discussion different than what's in the business item. But my goal is for consensus on the amount. So if the committee feels comfortable right now and wants to give a number, I happily accept it. If the committee wants me to do my best assessment of what I heard and bring a number forward to you on the 18th that you can either adopt or adjust in committee before you recommend approval.
Committee members, do you have a preferred approach?
Mr. Chair,
Councilmember
I'd like the
Johnson.
committee to really work on a number that we can put forward.
So we've heard two additional numbers, the 2 million, the 2.5 million. Is there consensus on one of those, or?
Increase you're talking about.
Correct, increase.
Or
So it'd be
4.5
4 or
total.
4.5 million total
Total.
in the LHIA.
Let's go for the 4.5.
Is there a consensus?
4.5.
Okay, that's the consensus recommendation from the committee.
It makes up for
Councilmember Wolf.
other years.
It's making me nervous.
It's making me a little nervous too.
But I think we also need to be mindful that we have several committee members that aren't here.
And they can weigh in on the 18th.
It'll be reflected in the minutes.
Yeah.
We can have a fuller discussion on the 18th.
The reward for
Okay.
showing up is to get to participate.
Right? So you heard that, correct? Thanks. And then I've just, for committee members who weren't part of the work group,
Never do.
we specifically spent quite a bit of time discussing the SEED program. This is a reduction in the amount, and Councilmember Wolf, with her institutional memory, has said we tend to reduce this program because it is undersubscribed. And I really, I just have to share my disbelief with that. I represent near South Minneapolis, near North Minneapolis, two of the most sort of eligible communities for this environmental work that happens in communities of color, low wealth communities. And I work, my day job is in the development ecosystem, and so I know all of the activity going on in these very contaminated communities. And so for me, it's a head scratcher why it's undersubscribed, but I really look forward to engaging with some of our partners, the cities I represent, City of Minneapolis especially, in figuring out how we can use those funds, or we have to have a conversation here. Is it important for us to be investing in environmental remediation in low wealth communities of color? And if it is, then we need to figure out how to make this work. If it's not, then do we eliminate the program? But for this year, we're going to kind of ride it out, reduce the funds a bit, and then go deeper with our partners on how to improve the program.
Good.
So.
Just to be clear,
Yeah,
that is part of the plan, is to figure out, are there some barriers to seed funding that we could learn from the development community?
That's the plan.
Okay.
Yeah. And there are some, I've heard from at least the City of Minneapolis, but we can, it's to figure out how to make it work. It's just, and it never has. That's my understanding, that historically it's undersubscribed, except for 1 year. I think it was the City of Hopkins, former Mayor Cummings, that used it all up. But yeah. Okay, cool. Ms. Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Director Augustin Hubner has been amazing in helping me catch up so quickly to be able to have this conversation with you. So any capacity I have to translate the FDP into how the council budgets is thanks to her. So now let's move into schedule. Not as much to go into with the schedule. I started sort of in order of the year. And so normally the first applications that go out are the pre-development applications. We didn't talk a ton about this in funding, but generally in Lcda and Lcda TOD, we make $250,000 available for pre-development awards. And if it's not fully used, it can be we put in the FDP so that we don't need a motion before you to move that money on into the regular program. And that's so the schedule, no real changes from what the 2019 schedule was for those application rounds. They look very similar. There's one in the spring and one in the fall. Questions on that? For regular Lcda, there is one change that I just want to make sure you're aware of and let me know if you have any concerns about in case your communities reach out to you about it. You know, I've heard from a lot of communities over the years, even before starting this role, that it feels like there are a lot of stages in the application process. It feels like there are a lot. And for those of you that aren't aware, you know, we issue the notice of funding availability, and then we hold design workshops where we give feedback on projects. Then there is a project concept plan that we look at to further communicate with potential applicants about where their competitiveness might be. Then there's the application. Then in the application review, there are interviews with the Livable Communities Advisory Committee. And so in conversations with both staff and communities, it sort of felt like there's a lot of steps here. And the project concept plan would free up 2 to 3 weeks in this multi-month process. And what I heard from staff was that it is a lot of work for not a big change in what the final applications end up showing. And again, I want to reiterate, there are these design workshops prior to this stage of the process where folks can bring a proposal. And at any time without a formal project concept plan, an applicant wants to discuss with one of our staff a project before they submit an application, we would always be available to do that.
So, Ms. Beard, can I ask, at the project concept plan phase, there's no evaluation done, correct? It's not used as a burst filter or something. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, no, it's basically technical assistance from staff on the where their project is at and what they may need to change to be competitive.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's really the only change to the typical program. Shortening up the process a little bit allows us to get award recommendations in front of you a little bit earlier. And again, shortens up the application process for applicants, which we hear is desirable. I will say I'd be surprised if you heard any complaints about this one, but famous last words, right? Before I show you the proposed schedule for the year for the Lcda TOD awards, I did want to mention that TOD eligibility often changes each year because of further stages that Transaway planning go into, and I apologize that I don't have this in map form for you, but the two red and underlined transit ways are additions, either in where they're located in this or being on here at all. So just to note that the gold line is now a part of regular applications and not pre-development applications, and the Riverview has been added to the pre-development application. So just to note that, and if you have more questions about that, please let me know. And then scheduling wise, same story as the Lcda regular program with eliminating the project concept plans due. I mentioned earlier that we stage TOD just a couple weeks cycles ahead of Lcda because TOD is more likely to not need all of the funding. And in that case, we can put additional funding into Lcda. So, you know, that means that Lcda TOD awards would be given in September, October, which would be, you know, a lot earlier than we've been able to do in past years. And it's consistently a message we hear would be appreciated. The LHIA schedule is completely dependent on Minnesota Housing's consolidated request for proposals. So this is basically just for applicants' information. They will apply entirely through Minnesota Housing's RFP process. We do our best to help, you know, connect folks as much as necessary to the ample technical assistance that Minnesota Housing provides. And then we, of course, participate in the partner application evaluation and selection process.
Councilmember Johnson.
Real quick, and I think I know the answer to this. So the projects that don't make it every year, they have to reapply. So it's an always, every year, everything, fresh start, got to come back at it, and everything is reviewed. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Beard.
That was it for schedule. So given the scoring criteria from 2 weeks ago, the funding allotments we talked about just now, and these schedule changes, you've basically seen everything we're planning to bring to you for approval on the 18th. And I'm here for any additional questions, but I really appreciate the feedback.
Thank you. Additional questions, Councilmember Johnson?
I just want to thank you for all your hard work. I don't know how you have enough hours in the day to do all of this, so I'm a little worried. But it's an immense amount of important work, and I'm really, really grateful to you. So thank you.
You're here. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to thank you for the clarity of the presentation. It is the most informative budget presentation that I think we've had on this particular topic in the time that I've been here. So
wonderful. Oh, impressive.
Thanks to Heather.
Well done. Well done. Any further questions? Thanks, Ms. Beard. We'll see you next time. And seeing no further business before this committee. Oh, wait. Director Barajas wanted to make an announcement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmembers, just a reminder, and you will have this on your calendars already, that our next meeting is on a Tuesday. Monday's a holiday. Please do not come here on Monday. February 18th, as Tara's been saying all night.
Great.
That's all I have. I'll be there. Thank you.
Thank you. And seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned.